A human man rented a room, but his roommates were two alien women. HFY Sci-Fi Story. Evan Hale arrived at Port Meridian with one small suitcase, a worn datapad, and a contract that barely paid enough to keep him fed. The station was massive, bigger than any city he had lived in on Earth. Long curved corridors stretched endlessly, lit by soft white panels. Above him, transparent ceilings showed distant stars sliding past, reminding him how far from home he truly was. Port Meridian was not built for humans. It was a trade hub designed by and for dozens of alien species, most of them taller, stronger, or better, adapted to space than humans. Evan felt that difference the moment he stepped off the transport shuttle. Gravity felt slightly heavier than Earth's, enough to make his legs ache after only a few minutes. The air smelled faintly metallic, filtered and recycled through systems far older than his home planet's space stations. He had come here because Earth companies paid extra for humans willing to work off-world. Humans were considered flexible, cheap, and easy to replace. Evan tried not to think about that last part. Housing was his first problem. Official human quarters were full, and private apartments cost more credits than he earned in a month. He spent 2 nights sleeping in a public rest zone before finally finding a listing buried deep in the station's housing network. Shared unit. Mixed species. 1 room available. Low cost. Evan did not hesitate. He sent the request before the listing disappeared. An hour later, his datapad chimed with approval and directions. The apartment was located in a quieter section of the station, far from the crowded markets. The corridor outside the unit was clean but old, the walls marked by scratches from species with claws or armored hands. Evan stopped in front of the door and took a breath before pressing the entry panel. The door slid open smoothly. 2 alien women stood inside. Evan froze. The first was tall and slender, her skin a pale blue-gray that reflected the light softly. Her eyes were large and dark, with no visible whites. Thin lines of silver markings ran along her temples and down her neck. She wore a simple robe-like garment and held a datapad close to her chest. Her posture was calm, almost still, like she was analyzing him rather than greeting him. The second alien was very different. She was shorter but broader, with deep red skin and ridged patterns along her arms and shoulders. Her eyes were sharp and golden, and small horn-like structures curved back from her head. She wore a fitted uniform with reinforced plates, clearly military or security issue. Her stance was tense, protective, as if Evan were a possible threat. Neither of them spoke at first. Evan swallowed and reminded himself to breathe. "Hello," he said carefully, keeping his voice calm. "My name is Evan Hale. I rented the spare room." The blue-gray alien tilted her head slightly. "You are the human," she said. Her voice was smooth and precise, translated through the station's universal system. "I am Lorathi. This is Kesari." Kesari crossed her arms. "The listing did not specify human," she said bluntly. Evan nodded. "I understand. I can leave if there's been a mistake." There was a brief silence. Lorathi looked at her datapad, then at Evan again. "The contract is valid," she said. "The room is yours. But understand this, our species do not commonly share living space with outsiders." "I'll stay out of the way," Evan said quickly. "I work long shifts. I don't need much." Kesari snorted softly. "Humans always say that." Lorathi stepped aside, allowing him to enter. "Follow the rules," she said. "Do not interfere with our schedules. Do not touch equipment without permission." Evan nodded again. "Of course." His room was small but clean. The bed was narrow, built for a species slightly taller than him, but it would do. There was a small desk, a storage locker, and a single viewport showing the slow movement of stars. Evan set his suitcase down and sat on the bed, letting out a quiet breath. He had a roof over his head. That was enough. The first few days were uncomfortable. Lorathi followed a strict routine, waking at precise intervals and spending hours in silence working on scientific research. Kesari came and went at odd times, often returning with bruises or scorched marks on her armor. Their conversations were brief and functional. Evan made sure not to interrupt. He learned quickly. He learned when the shared kitchen was free, which food processors were safe for human use, and which sections of the apartment had different gravity settings. He learned that Larathi disliked noise and that Kesari disliked weakness. Humans, he noticed, were considered both. One evening, Evan returned from work exhausted. His muscles burned from a long shift repairing external sensor arrays. As he stepped inside the apartment, the lights flickered. Then they went out completely. The air circulation slowed and the temperature began to drop. Kesari immediately reached for a weapon mounted near the door. "Power failure," she said sharply. Larathi checked her datapad. "The station grid is unstable. Backup systems are delayed." Evan felt his heart speed up. He knew what that meant. Without power, life support would fail in smaller residential units like theirs. "How long?" he asked. Larathi hesitated. "Unknown." Kesari looked at him. "Humans cannot survive low-oxygen environments for long," she said. Evan forced himself to stay calm. "Neither can you if the system shuts down completely." He moved toward the maintenance panel near the wall. Kesari stepped in front of him instantly. "Do not touch that." "I'm trained," Evan said. "Basic station systems are similar to human designs. Let me look." Larathi studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slightly. "Proceed." Evan opened the panel. Inside was a mess of cables and circuits, clearly old and poorly maintained. He worked carefully, his fingers moving from memory more than thought. He rerouted power, bypassed a damaged relay, and manually activated the auxiliary battery. The lights flickered back on. The air circulation strengthened. Kesari stared at the panel, then at Evan. "You repaired it," she said. "Temporarily," Evan replied. Sweat rolled down his forehead. "It should hold until station power comes back." Larathi stepped closer, her eyes focused on the system. "Your solution was efficient," she said quietly. Evan closed the panel and leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. "Humans fix things, it's kind of our thing." For the first time since he arrived, the tension in the room shifted. Over the next days, things changed in small ways. Larathi asked Evan about human engineering methods. Kesari watched him more closely, not with suspicion but curiosity. Evan continued his routine, helping when he could, never demanding attention or comfort. He repaired a faulty temperature regulator without being asked. He adjusted the gravity balance to reduce strain on shared areas. He even learned to prepare a meal that all three of them could safely consume. One night, as Evan returned late from work, he noticed Kesari sitting at the table, her arm wrapped in a medical brace. Her breathing was shallow. "Are you injured?" he asked. She looked up sharply, then hesitated. "Training accident." "May I help?" Evan asked. Kesari hesitated again, then nodded. Evan cleaned the wound carefully, following the medical instructions displayed on the brace. His hands shook slightly from exhaustion, but he did not stop. When he finished, Kesari flexed her arm slowly. "You did not panic," she said. "I've had practice," Evan replied softly. As he returned to his room that night, Evan felt something unfamiliar, not comfort, but belonging. Outside the viewport, stars drifted by in silence. Somewhere deep within Port Meridian, systems hummed back to life. And in a small, shared apartment, three very different beings began to realize that living together might not be a mistake after all. The next cycle on Port Meridian began quietly, but nothing felt the same inside the apartment. Evan woke before the station lights shifted to day mode. His body still ached from long hours of work, but he moved carefully, not wanting to disturb the others. As he stepped into the shared space, he noticed something new. The temperature was adjusted closer to human comfort levels. Not perfect, but closer than before. He paused, then continued toward the kitchen. Larathi was already awake, seated at the table with her datapad floating above the surface. She looked up when Evan entered. There was no tension in her posture this time. "Good cycle," she said. "Good cycle," Evan replied, surprised by how normal it felt. Kesari was not there. Her duty schedule was unpredictable, and Evan had learned not to ask. Instead, he prepared a simple meal using the shared processor, carefully selecting ingredients approved for all species. When he finished, he left one portion sealed and labeled before heading to work. He did not mention it. At his job, Evan spent the day outside the station hull, repairing damaged antennae left from the recent power instability. The stars felt close out there, endless and cold. His suit was old, the seals worn, but he trusted it. Humans learned early how to trust imperfect things. By the time he returned, his muscles were shaking with fatigue. The apartment door slid open to reveal Kesari standing near the entryway. She was fully armored, but her movements were stiff. "You walk slowly," she said. Evan shrugged. "Long day." She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside to let him pass. "Your food preparation was acceptable," she added. Evan smiled faintly. "I'll take that as a compliment." Later that cycle, the station announced partial repairs to the main grid. Most systems were stable again, but older residential sections like theirs were still flagged as low priority. That meant random outages, delayed maintenance, and increased inspections. Larathi explained this calmly during their shared meal. "There is a possibility our living arrangement will be reviewed," she said. "Mixed species units are often considered inefficient." Kesari scoffed. "They will blame the human." Evan set his utensils down. "If it's a problem, I can start looking for another place." "No," Larathi said immediately. Both Evan and Kesari looked at her. "The data does not support removal," Larathi continued. "Our unit's efficiency has increased since your arrival. Resource waste has decreased. System failures have reduced." Evan blinked. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You did not," Larathi said. "You caused improvement." Kesari leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Still," she said, "others will not see it that way." They were right. 2 cycles later, an official notice arrived. A station inspector would visit their unit to assess compliance with habitation standards. The message was formal and cold. Evan felt his stomach tighten. He knew how this usually went. Humans were tolerated when useful, removed when inconvenient. He spent the next day cleaning and repairing every small issue he could find. Loose panels, worn seals, unstable shelves. He worked quietly, efficiently, leaving no sign of strain. When the inspector arrived, it was not just one being, but 3. A tall avian species with metal implants, a heavyset insectoid, and a sleek artificial intelligence unit hovering silently behind them. They scanned the apartment, their devices humming softly. "The human presence is noted," the avian inspector said. "Explain." "This unit operates within acceptable parameters," Larathi said calmly. "All regulations are met." The insectoid clicked its mandibles. "Humans are classified as high risk in mixed environments." Evan stepped forward slightly. "With respect," he said, "may I present the maintenance logs?" The inspectors paused. Humans rarely spoke during evaluations. Evan transmitted the data. Logs showed power stability improvements, reduced resource consumption, and faster response times during failures. The AI unit processed the information. "Efficiency increase confirmed," it said. The avian inspector frowned. "Temporary effects are possible." "Then observe longer," Larathi said. After a moment, the inspectors left, issuing no immediate penalty. The door closed behind them and the apartment felt suddenly very quiet. Kesari exhaled sharply. "They were looking for an excuse," Evan nodded. "They always are." That night, an emergency alarm echoed through Port Meridian. "Hull breach. External impact. Sector 12. Their sector. The lights flashed red as emergency protocols activated. Kesari was moving instantly, securing armor and weapons. Larathi began pulling up station maps. Evan grabbed his emergency kit without hesitation. "Stay here," Kesari ordered. I can help, Evan said. You are not trained for combat. No, Evan agreed, but I'm trained for repair. The station trembled violently as something struck the outer hull. Gravity fluctuated, throwing Evan against the wall. He recovered quickly, stabilizing himself. Laratha's voice remained calm. Multiple pressure losses detected. Evacuation routes are compromised. Kesari looked at Evan, her golden eyes sharp. If you slow us down, I won't, Evan said simply. They moved together through the corridors, alarms blaring, smoke filling the air. Other residents were panicking, shouting in dozens of languages. Evan focused on the task in front of him. When they reached the damaged section, the sight was bad. A jagged tear in the hull vented atmosphere into space. Emergency fields held weakly, flickering. Station engineers were already there arguing. Evan did not wait. He assessed the damage, scanned the systems, and spoke clearly. We need to reroute power to the field generator and reinforce the seal manually. The others stared at him. He's human, someone said. And correct, Larathi added. Evan worked fast, his movements precise despite the chaos. He climbed into narrow spaces others could not fit, securing clamps and sealing fractures. His suit alarms screamed as oxygen levels dropped, but he ignored them. Kesari covered him, standing firm as debris slammed into her armor. She did not move. When the final seal engaged, the emergency field stabilized. Atmosphere levels rose slowly. Lives were saved. Evan collapsed to his knees as medics rushed in. His hands trembled, his vision blurred, but he was smiling. Later, back in the apartment, silence filled the space again. Kesari sat across from Evan, her armor removed, her posture relaxed in a way he had never seen before. You could have died, she said. So could you, Evan replied. She nodded slowly. You did not retreat. Larathi looked between them. Human resilience continues to exceed projections. Evan leaned back, exhausted. We don't always win, he said. We just keep going. Outside the viewport, repair drones moved like fireflies against the dark. Port Meridian survived another crisis, and somewhere within its endless corridors, opinions about humans had begun to shift, not loudly, but permanently. The days after the hull breach passed slowly, but the station felt different. Port Meridian still buzzed with trade and movement, yet something had shifted beneath the surface. Stories traveled faster than official reports ever could, and Evan's actions spread quietly through maintenance crews, security teams, and residential sectors. A human had helped seal a breach. A human had stayed when others hesitated. Evan did not hear most of these stories. He returned to his routine, reporting to work, fixing systems, keeping his head down. That was how humans survived in places like this. Do the job, do it well, don't ask for recognition. Inside the apartment, things continued to change. Kesari no longer watched Evan like a potential liability. Instead, she watched him like a variable she was still trying to understand. She asked questions now, short, direct ones, about human training, endurance, and why humans took risks without armor or natural defenses. We adapt, Evan said one evening while recalibrating a power coupler, or we don't make it. Larathi recorded these conversations, not secretly, openly. She informed Evan that her research focus had shifted. Human behavioral resilience under environmental pressure, she explained. Your species presents contradictions. Evan smiled tiredly. We're used to that. But outside the apartment, not everyone was pleased. A new notice arrived from station administration. A formal review of mixed species housing policies was being launched. Evan's name was listed clearly. This time, the tone was sharper. Kesari read the notice twice, her jaw tightening. They want to make an example, Larathi nodded. Statistically, humans are easier to remove than to integrate. Evan sat quietly, his hands folded. He had expected this. He always did. If they decide I need to leave, he said, I won't fight it. Kesari looked at him sharply. Why not? Because I don't have power here, Evan replied. I only have usefulness. Loratha's eyes narrowed slightly. That is an inefficient system. The review process began quickly. Inspectors returned, this time with representatives from housing control, security oversight, and resource management. The apartment was scanned again, more thoroughly than before. Questions were directed at Evan. Why was he living here? What authority had approved his residence? Did he understand the risks he posed to non-human occupants? Evan answered calmly. He did not raise his voice. He did not apologize for existing. I follow regulations, he said. I contribute to maintenance. I reduce system strain. I respond to emergencies. That does not negate biological limitations, one official replied. No, Evan agreed. But it doesn't define capability either. The officials exchanged looks. Larathi submitted data. Weeks of logs, energy usage comparisons, response times, and repair efficiency metrics. The numbers were clear. The unit performed better with Evan present. Still, doubt remained. During the review period, another crisis struck. This one was quieter but more dangerous. A chain failure began deep in the station's older infrastructure. Cooling systems lagged. Power distribution slowed. Minor malfunctions appeared across multiple sectors. Individually, they were manageable. Together, they formed a pattern. Evan saw it first. He noticed it while reviewing routine diagnostics at work. Human engineers were trained to look for patterns in failure, not just failures themselves. He flagged the issue and sent reports up the chain. They were ignored. Low priority, the response said. Monitor only. Evan felt a familiar frustration settle in his chest. Humans were often trusted to fix problems, but rarely trusted to predict them. Back at the apartment, he explained the situation to Lorathi. Her eyes widened slightly as she reviewed his data. This indicates a cascading failure risk. Yes, Evans said. If it reaches the central thermal exchangers, the station could lose entire sectors. Kesari stood up immediately. We informed security. They tried. The response was delayed, bureaucratic, and dismissive. The station had survived worse, they were told. Resources were already stretched. Evan leaned back against the wall, thinking. Then we don't wait, he said. They began working on their own. Larathi coordinated simulations and projections. Kesari contacted trusted security contacts she had trained with. Evan started moving through maintenance tunnels, reinforcing weak points, rerouting systems, and manually balancing loads. He slept in short bursts, ate when he remembered. Other workers noticed. Some joined him, not because he was human, but because he was right. As pressure built, the station finally acknowledged the threat, but too late. The failure spread faster than expected. Entire sectors lost power. Gravity fluctuations caused injuries. Panic returned. This time, Evan was not just a worker. He became a coordinator. Using simple language and clear instructions, he organized mixed-species teams. He adjusted plans on the fly, compensating for different strengths and limitations. Humans, it turned out, were very good at working with imperfect systems and imperfect people. During the worst moment, when the central exchanger began overheating, Evan volunteered to enter the core access tunnel. Radiation levels were high. The tunnel was narrow and unstable. No, Kesari said firmly. You will not survive prolonged exposure. I don't need prolonged, Evan replied, just enough. He went anyway. The tunnel burned his lungs, his vision blurred. Alarms screamed in his suit, but he reached the manual override and engaged the release. The system stabilized. Evan collapsed moments later, pulled free by emergency teams. He survived, barely. When he woke in a medical bay, Larathi was there. Kesari stood nearby, silent, her arms crossed tightly. You should not have survived, Larathi said softly. Evan smiled weakly. I hear that a lot. The station review resumed after the crisis, but the tone had changed completely. Officials now had reports from multiple departments, witness statements, data, proof that the crisis had been predicted by a human and mitigated by one. When Evan was called to speak, the room was full. He stood calmly, wearing a simple station uniform. "I didn't do this to prove anything," he said. "I did it because this place is home now, and when things break, humans fix them, even if no one listens at first." There was silence. Then one of the inspectors spoke. "Your presence has altered operational outcomes beyond projected limits." "Yes," Evan said, "that's what humans do." The decision came shortly after. Evan was cleared, not as an exception, as a precedent. Mixed species housing policies were revised. Human classification was updated. Not strong, not fast, but adaptable, reliable under pressure. Back at the apartment, things felt quieter than ever. Kesari poured a drink and handed one to Evan. "You are still fragile," she said. Evan laughed softly. "I know. But you are not weak," she added. Larathi closed her datapad. "Humanity will require reassessment across multiple disciplines." Evan leaned back in his chair, exhaustion settling deep into his bones. "All I wanted was a room." Outside the viewport, Port Meridian glowed against the stars, scarred but stable. And for the first time since leaving Earth, Evan felt certain of one thing. He belonged here, not because he was human, but because humanity mattered. Weeks passed after the station-wide failure, and Port Meridian gradually returned to its usual rhythm. The markets were busy again, transports hummed along the corridors, and maintenance crews moved steadily across the station. Yet something had changed. A quiet acknowledgement lingered in the halls. Humans, while physically weaker, were far from incapable. Some even began to look at Evan Hale with a cautious respect. Evan returned to the apartment one evening, exhausted but calm. The small room that had once seemed cramped and alien now felt like a space he belonged in. He placed his toolbox carefully on the floor, unzipped his suit, and let the recycled air wash over him. For the first time in many cycles, he allowed himself to relax fully. Kesari was already there, seated on the edge of the table, her golden eyes watching him as he moved. She wore her armor in pieces, leaving only the essentials for her daily security checks. "You push yourself too far," she said quietly. Her tone lacked the sharpness it once carried. Now it was almost concerned. "I know," Evan admitted, leaning against the wall. "I just do what needs to be done." She tilted her head, studying him. "You risk your life repeatedly, and yet you seem calm." "Humans rarely behave this way." Evan smiled faintly. "We survive by staying calm. Fear doesn't help anyone fix a broken system." Larathi floated nearby, her datapad hovering as always. She looked at Evan with something close to fascination. "Your species exhibits an unusual blend of fragility and resilience, physical weakness yet persistent problem-solving, emotional adaptability without chaos." Her voice was precise, almost clinical. "I must revise all prior assessments." Evan chuckled softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." For the next few cycles, life settled into a pattern, but the station administration had not forgotten the apartment's unique circumstances. They began quietly observing, noting the successes and contributions Evan made in coordination with his roommates. His small acts, repaired panels, reorganized maintenance logs, optimized schedules, were cataloged alongside the larger incidents. Slowly, humans were reclassified not as liabilities, but as assets in mixed-species operations. The apartment itself became a hub for quiet interspecies learning. Larathi began to consult Evan on engineering matters, her logic-driven mind absorbing his human approaches to improvisation and redundancy. Kesari, who had once considered Evan a burden, now asked for his advice on strategic logistics, curious about how a human mind approached problem-solving in unpredictable conditions. Evan found himself teaching without effort, sharing knowledge naturally, his species, adaptability shining through in ways neither alien had anticipated. One evening, after a long day of station-wide audits, the three shared a meal. It was a simple affair. Protein gels converted for mixed species consumption, carefully balanced with flavors they could all tolerate. Yet the conversation was anything but simple. They discussed the recent changes in policy, the new respect accorded to humans, and the subtle ways the station had shifted its view of them all. "You've changed more than the administration knows," Kesari said softly, her arms crossed as she leaned back. "They see your results, but they don't see the persistence behind them," Evan shrugged. "Persistence is just living. Humans adapt. That's what we do." Larathi nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the table. "Adaptation coupled with calculated risk has produced outcomes far exceeding any predictive model. Your behavior challenges assumptions about human fragility." Evan leaned back, tired but content. Guests were full of surprises. Their days continued with a blend of routine and the occasional emergency. Minor system failures were now approached with calm efficiency rather than panic. Evan's human perspective complemented Laratha's analytical approach and Kesari's tactical instincts. Together, they became an unspoken team, a unit that others began to notice. Station residents would occasionally comment, quietly, on how well their apartment operated, orderly, efficient, and surprisingly harmonious. One cycle, a routine inspection brought a group of new trainees through their sector. The station was training humans, aliens, and hybrids for complex interspecies missions. The trainees watched as Evan coordinated minor repairs, adjusted energy flows, and handled environmental controls, all under the watchful eyes of Larathi and Kesari. By the end of the session, many trainees whispered about the human who could adapt under pressure, whose calmness had prevented multiple small disasters. Evan returned home that evening, weary but fulfilled. He opened the apartment door to see Larathi waiting with a fresh cup of nutrient tea, her expression neutral yet warm in her own way. Kesari was cleaning her armor, humming softly, a sound Evan realized he had grown to recognize as rare relaxation. "You continue to perform above expectations," Larathi said as he took the tea. "It is remarkable." Evan sipped slowly. "It's not about expectations, it's about making things work." Kesari glanced at him over her shoulder. "You make us all work better. You've changed how we function as roommates, not just individually but together." Evan smiled faintly. "I didn't plan on that." "You don't have to plan," Larathi said, almost philosophically. "Human adaptability ensures results." The evening stretched quietly after that. Outside, Port Meridian shimmered against the stars, alive with activity and hums of distant engines. Inside, the apartment had become something more than a room. It was a small laboratory of coexistence, a place where species differences were not barriers but strengths to be understood and complemented. Months passed, and with each cycle, Evan's presence was more deeply felt. Larathi incorporated human problem-solving into her research methodology. Kesari adjusted tactical training to include human endurance strategies. Both had grown in ways they did not anticipate. And Evan, he had grown too. He had learned patience beyond human norms, a measured approach to risk, and the value of quiet cooperation over loud dominance. His species' reputation improved not through conquest or power, but through persistent, reliable action. One day, the station administration offered him a transfer to an official human liaison position, a role with greater pay, prestige, and opportunity for influence. He considered it seriously, but then looked around the apartment. Larathi was organizing data in her quiet, precise way. Kesari was adjusting the ventilation panel with careful attention. They did not need him to leave, they needed him to remain. He realized that this room, these roommates, and this small shared life had become more important than recognition or rank. Evan declined the offer politely. "This is where I belong," he said simply. "Not for the station, not for credits, for this." The alien women exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. Kesari nodded once sharply in approval. Laratha's eyes softened ever so slightly. "Your choice is logical," she said, "and rare." Evenings in the apartment became a rhythm of quiet productivity and shared space. They repaired minor station issues together, experimented with optimization, and occasionally debated theories that crossed species perspectives. It was never perfect, disagreements arose, tempers flared, but the underlying respect and trust were constant. One night, as Evan watched the stars slip past the viewport, he reflected on how far he had come. He had arrived expecting discomfort, judgment, and isolation. Instead, he had found cooperation, respect, and understanding. His human traits, fragility, persistence, and adaptability, had reshaped the apartment and even left a mark on Port Meridian itself. Kesari leaned against the wall, looking out with him. "Do you ever miss Earth?" she asked quietly. "Sometimes," Evan replied. "But I've learned that home isn't always where you started. It's where you're needed, where you belong." Larathi joined them, placing a small floating device on the table, displaying a schematic of a newly optimized energy grid. "Humans," she said softly, "teach lessons we often overlook, not through strength, but through consistency and calm resolve." Evan smiled, feeling the weight of the cycles behind him and the promise of the cycles ahead. "Guests were full of surprises," he said, echoing an earlier statement. The three of them sat in silence, listening to the low hum of Port Meridian, watching the distant stars. Their apartment, once an uncomfortable necessity, had become a quiet testament to the resilience and ingenuity of humanity. And in the vastness of the station, amidst countless species, Evan Hale knew something profound. Humans could be underestimated, doubted, and overlooked, and still, quietly, they could make a difference that no one could ignore. Because strength was not only in power, but in persistence, cooperation, and the ability to adapt when it mattered most. The apartment door slid softly closed as night deepened. Outside, Port Meridian continued to turn, alive and thriving, and inside, a human had truly found his place among the stars.